The Siege of Lachish of 701 BC. Photographed by Osama S. M. Amin. Displayed in the British Museum. From Nineveh, modern-day Mosul Governorate, Iraq, Room 16 of the Southwest Palace, panels 9 to 10. As stated in the book of Isaiah, in the 36th chapter, now it came to pass in the 14th year of King Hezekiah that Sennacherib king of Assyria came up against all the fortified cities of Judah and took them. And in Isaiah chapter 8, now therefore, behold, the Lord brings up over them the waters of the river, strong and mighty the king of Assyria and all his glory. He will go up over all his channels and go over all his banks. 8 He will pass through Judah, he will overflow and pass over, he will reach up to the neck, and the stretching out of his wings will fill the breadth of your land, O Immanuel. Be shattered, O you peoples, and be broken in pieces. Give ear, all you from far countries. Gird yourselves, but be broken in pieces, gird yourselves, but be broken in pieces. Take counsel together, but it will come to nothing, speak the word, but it will not stand, for God is with us. The Assyrian relief is the fulfillment of this very prophecy. The Assyrian king Sennacherib sits on his luxurious chair on a low mound. There is a tent behind him. His commander-in-chief stands before him, in a very close proximity, and greets him after conquering the city of Lachish. Assyrian soldiers, the king's bodyguards, wear their exquisite military uniform and carry their weapons. Prisoners from Lachish are being reviewed and presented to the king. One prostrates and another two kneel, they seem to ask for mercy. Most likely, they were later beheaded. The king obviously had been watching the battle and its victorious aftermath. This panel shows the Assyrian base camp from which the siege was conducted. It is fortified with a road running through the middle. Servants are working in tents, and 2 priests are performing a ceremony in front of the chariots on which are mounted the standards of the gods. The beginning of the attack on Lachish in 701 BCE. This is a detail of a large stone wall panel, which shows the Assyrian soldiers slinging small rounded stones, so-called slingers, at the enemy soldiers defending the city's towers. The beginning of the assault on Lachish in 701 BCE. This is a detail of a large stone wall panel, which shows Assyrian archers shooting arrows with their large bows. The archers stand behind siege engines, not shown here. The beginning of the attack on Lachish in 701 BCE. This is a detail of a large stone wall panel which shows Assyrian soldiers in action, holding their long spears and rounded shields. This is the main documentation of the battlefield. Lachish was a heavily fortified city, lying on a steep hill. The Assyrians had to build several ramps in order to transport their military equipment high up the hill in order to reach the city walls and gate. The city gate was situated at the southern side of the hill, which was much steeper than its northern counterpart. Siege engines and soldiers are ascending and attacking the city. The defenders, soldiers on city towers, are trying desperately to shoot arrows, throw stones and rocks, and pour water on the Assyrians. The Assyrians were well-equipped, ruthless warriors. After few weeks of the siege, the city was sacked, and the Assyrians conquered the city. Here, the Assyrian army is crushing the enemy and has reached the city wall. The soldiers of Lachish are still within their protective towers. Assyrian slingers and archers ascend up the artificial ramp to the city walls. They are being led and protected by a spearman, who holds a large rounded shield. Note their highly professional military uniform, shoes, and helmets. An Assyrian siege engine ascends up the ramp. This is a wheeled vehicle with a platform for archers. A battering ram can be attached at the front for breaking through gates or walls. The engine is being attacked by stones, rocks, and fiery torches. One of the Lachish's towers appears on the right side of this photograph. This is a dynamic scene. The battering ram of the siege engine is being attacked by fire torches, which were thrown by the soldiers of Lachish. One of the Assyrian soldiers, within the engine, is ready and seems to anticipate this attack. He is pouring water on the engine in order to prevent it from catching fire. Despite all the damage, it seems that the engine is immune to this attack. The defenders, Hebrew soldiers, are positioned on one of the city wall's towers, trying to ward off the Assyrians. A soldier is throwing an arrow, while his companions are throwing stones and rocks. The surrounding environment is bombarded with fire torches and stones. Early in the battle, some of the soldiers of Lachish were captured by the Assyrian army. This detail of the stone panel depicts the impalement process. 3 prisoners of war are being impaled by Assyrian soldiers. Impalement is not an ordinary method of execution, rather it is a very brutal and ruthless approach that was used in wartime to suppress rebellions. Prisoners of war were impaled in front of the city of Lachish to terrorize the city's inhabitants. Note that the victims appear to handcuffed and naked. Death in this fashion is very painful and typically slow, as many hours are required before the victim dies. Lachish's defense forces have started to collapse here. Lachish's gate has been opened, and the city's inhabitants are fleeing Lachish, holding their personal belongings or whatever they could bring with them. This detail shows women and 2 men. It appears that they are walking down the hill and have reached the Assyrian artificial ramp. It seems that the Assyrian army lets them go without killing them on the spot. The surrounding battlefield is hellish. The Assyrians continue to progress successfully while the defenders of Lachish are desperately resisting the invasion. Finally, Lachish has collapsed and its defense forces are crushed. The city will be damaged and ransacked. The leaders of the rebellion will be executed on the spot, while ordinary soldiers and people will be deported into exile within the Assyrian Empire. This detail of the stone wall panel shows that Assyrian soldiers are flaying 2 naked prisoners from Lachish. Meanwhile, on the left, Lachish's people are deported while observing the torture. An Assyrian soldier guides a deported family from Lachish. A man holds a large box on his shoulders. A young woman guides a 2-wheeled cart pulled by a bull, while a woman holds a boy and a girl. Note how the family tried to bring as much as they could from their household. Another exiled Judean family, note their personal belongings and the young kids. An exiled Judean family from Lachish is carrying their belongings on a camel in this scene. At the end of the battle and capture of Lachish, the victorious Sennacherib sits on a magnificent throne. He greets his commander-in-chief, who stands before him. The king's army parades booty and prisoners of war, not shown here, in front of him. The king's bodyguards are stationed around him. 2 attendants stand behind Sennacherib, waving fly whisks so that nothing, not even little creatures buzzing around in the air, disturb the king's tranquility. There is a royal tent behind the king. At the upper part of the panel, we can recognize figs and vines. The cuneiform inscription on the left reads, Sennacherib, king of the world, king of Assyria, sat on a throne, and the booty of Lachish passed before him. The king's face was later deliberately defaced, most likely by an enemy soldier, after the fall of Nineveh in 612 BCE. Assyrian soldiers parading the prisoners of war before Sennacherib, on the right and not shown here. Most likely, these figures represent the heads of the rebellion. All of them are barefooted and wear nothing on their head, which is a sign of humiliation. All of them seem to ask for mercy. One prostrates, two kneels, and the other three stand before the king. They were executed later on in all likelihood. Some of the prisoners are beheaded here. The one on the left is about to be decapitated by an Assyrian soldier. Another prisoner on the right, most of his body is lost, has already been beheaded. His supine and flaccid posture suggests this. Two Assyrian soldiers on the right side observe the beheading process. Assyrian literature clearly mentions that only the heads of a rebellion, king, prince, commander-in-chief, high-ranking officials, etc., face execution, usually through beheading. This is a detail of part of a terracotta prism. This foundation document is one of the Annals of Sennacherib, dating back to 694 BCE. The Akkadian cuneiform inscriptions narrate the military campaigns of Sennacherib, the capture of Lachish, and the siege of Jerusalem in 701 BCE. The king's account of the siege of Lachish is given in column 3, lines 38 to 81. From Nineveh, Mesopotamia, Iraq. Flint sling stones, with modern sling. These stones were excavated at level 3 of the city gate of Lachish. They were thrown by the Assyrian soldiers at the city's towers. Donated by Sir Henry Solomon Welcome in 1956. These are arrowheads found at Lachish. There are 6 iron arrowheads and 6 bone arrowheads. The latter were produced during the siege when iron became scarce. There is incrustation and discoloration, from burns, of these bony arrowheads. These were also donated by Sir Henry Solomon Welcome in 1956. Plan of the southwest palace of Sennacherib at Nineveh. Room XXXVI was labeled with red lines to show the original alignment and position of these wall reliefs, which are now housed in the British Museum. Room 10B at the British Museum. The Siege of Lachish wall reliefs can be seen here with their corresponding descriptions. Prisoners playing lyres. 3 musicians, possibly Judean prisoners, are marched under escort through a mountainous country. Their dress indicate that they came from somewhere to the west of Assyria, possibly Phoenicia. Detail of Sennacherib's marvelous chair. The king sits on this exquisitely carved chair or throne. There are 3 vertical registers of men wearing horned head caps, deities. The king's feet rests on footstool. Note the king's shoe and his dress. This is one of the most commonly overlooked figures within the Lachish's reliefs. Recognizable by his long sword hanging by his side, his curly beard, wonderful dress, and his diadem, this figure greets Sennacherib in a close proximity, almost touching him, which denotes a person of a highest rank. This is man in command of the king and second in command of the whole Assyrian Empire, the so-called Tertanu in Assyrian. The king's hand appears on the right. A soldier or bodyguard holding a mace is seen on the left, behind this figure. Sennacherib's head was deliberately damaged by an enemy soldier after the fall of Nineveh in 612 BCE. This is the only figure depicted on the Lachish's reliefs, which was vandalized. Note that the head cap received 5 hits by a sharp object, while the king's face was slashed by a large thrust. The latter virtually erased the king's eyes, nose, and mouth. This is the footstool of the king. Here, the king appears to wear a shoe, not a sandal. Note the shoe's exquisitely carved details. This is one of the 2 cuneiform inscriptions, which were carved on one of the reliefs. These 4 horizontal lines read, Sennacherib, the mighty king, king of the country of Assyria, sitting on the throne of judgment, before, or at the entrance of, the city of Lachish, Lachish. I give permission for its slaughter. This is the 2nd cuneiform inscription, which reads, Tent of Sennacherib, king of Assyria. Finally, this is not part of the Lachish's reliefs. This wall relief was found in another room, room XXXII of the Southwest Palace. The overall design and depictions of the figures and their similarities with those of Lachish's point to the same artist or creator. Here, Assyrian soldiers are reviewing prisoners of war and deported inhabitants of cities, which Sennacherib conquered. Women and children appear interspersed among the male prisoners. Some of the men are handcuffed, while a few raise their hands, as a gesture for mercy. At the upper right part of the panel, Assyrian soldiers hold decapitated heads and pile of heads can also be seen. Now let's make note of the phenotype of the Judeans. Notice how the Assyrians depicted them as Negroes. Remember that these are the descendants of the Hebrews who lived in Egypt as slaves before God delivered them and birthed them as a nation through their great exodus. These people mixed with the Hamites in Egypt. That is why Israelites, such as Paul, was mistaken for an Egyptian in the book of Acts. Even the Lord Jesus and his family fled into Egypt to hide from Herod the Great. The family of David was living with people who looked like themselves Egyptians. The Son of God came into the world through Negroes. And these same people are now scattered throughout the world as poor, defeated, oppressed peoples, who are suffering under the curses spoken by Moses in Deuteronomy chapter 28. Not because they broke the law of Moses, but because they rejected the Son of God and persecuted his messengers. Therefore, God's wrath has come on them to the uttermost, until God turns them back to himself, after the fullness of the Gentiles have come into the faith of Christ.